My name is Nora Pemberton. I'm 41. And the morning my father's lawyer read the last page of his will, my sister was still smiling when the room went silent. She'd been smiling for 3 days. Through the wake, through the eulogy I gave with my hands shaking, through the casserole line at the church basement where her husband Mitchell shook hands like he was running for office, Camille smiled because she'd already done the math. Dad's house in Montford, the one with the wraparound porch and the wisteria that took my mother 30 summers to train across the front. The investment account he'd built from selling antique clocks on weekends for 20 years. The land in Madison County. By her arithmetic, it was already hers, because she was the one who had married well, who had stayed in the family pictures, who had given Dad 2 grandchildren with the right last name. And I was the one who'd come home. I was the one who'd quit my own apartment, packed 3 years of my life into the spare bedroom on Cherry Street, and learned how to inject anti-nausea medication into my father's thigh at 3 in the morning when the pancreatic cancer pulled him under for the 11th time that week. By Camille's arithmetic, that didn't count as much. Caretaking was just love. Love wasn't an asset. Assets were assets. She was about to learn that the man who taught us both how to read had also taught one of us how to bury a secret 30 years deep and let it sleep until the right page turned. I'm an estate appraiser. That's my job. I walk into the homes of people who have just died, and I tell their surviving families what their parents' lives were worth in dollars. A walnut secretary desk. A 1920s Steinway upright with the original ivory keys. A first edition of a book nobody under 60 has heard of. I spend my days assigning numbers to things that were never about numbers. I do this work because of my mother. Eleanor Whitfield Pemberton died of a congenital heart defect when I was 11 and Camille was 8. I remember the house emptying out afterward. Not metaphorically, literally. Her family, the Whitfields, came in like a delivery crew, took inventory of what they considered theirs, and left with a moving truck and 2 of her oil paintings. My father stood in the hallway in his socks and didn't say a word. He told me later he'd promised her he wouldn't fight them in front of us. He kept that promise. He kept a lot of promises I didn't understand until I was much older. And one promise I didn't understand until the morning Robert Vance, my father's lawyer for 32 years, set down the official will on his polished mahogany desk, looked at the 3 of us across from him, and said, in the careful tone of a man who has read many wills and knows which sentences land like stones, there is one more document I'm required to read aloud. Your father added it 11 months ago. He asked that it be read only after the primary will was complete. Camille's smile had been holding for 3 days. It would not hold for 10 more minutes. Mitchell, her husband, leaned back in the leather chair with his hands laced behind his head, looking like a man who'd already mentally renovated the Montford house. He winked at me. Not unkindly, the wink of a man who has decided to be magnanimous in victory. He'd been planning his magnanimity all week. Camille had told me on Tuesday, in the kitchen at the wake, that we had decided I could have the silver tea service. The set my mother had inherited from her mother. They had decided. They. As if I'd been waiting at the door of my own family with my hand out. I didn't argue. I never argue at funerals. My father raised me to believe that the dead are listening, and you don't make a scene where they can still hear you. But Mr. Vance was about to make a scene, or rather my father was, from somewhere past the wisteria and the morphine, and the long quiet years he'd spent protecting a truth I never knew he was holding. Mr. Vance opened a second folder. The folder was thinner than the first. The paper inside was cream-colored, the kind used for personal correspondence, not legal documents. He cleared his throat the way men do when they're about to read someone else's grief out loud. And Camille, my sister who had been smiling, finally looked at me. For 1 second, she saw something on my face she hadn't expected. Confusion. Not satisfaction. Not triumph. Just the same confusion she felt. And that, more than anything, was the moment her smile began to break. To understand what was in that second folder, you have to understand what kind of family the Pembertons were, and what kind of family the Whitfields were, and how those two families had been quietly at war for 30 years over a girl named Eleanor, who'd had the audacity to fall in love with a man who fixed clocks for a living. My mother grew up in the house my father later raised us in, the Montford House. 3 stories of Greek revival with original heart pine floors, a butler's pantry that nobody used as a butler's pantry anymore, and a brass mail slot in the front door engraved with a W. The W stood for Whitfield. The Whitfields had been in Asheville since the 1880s, which in Mountain, North Carolina, is the kind of pedigree that gets your family's name on a hospital wing and a paragraph in a local history book. My grandmother, Margaret Whitfield, wore wool suits to the grocery store and spoke to waitresses in the voice you'd use to address a postal worker who'd lost your package. My grandfather Walter died when I was very young. I remember his hands more than his face. Big knuckles. A signet ring. A way of placing one finger on the rim of a glass to signal that he was done with it, and would like it refilled. My father, Harold Pemberton, grew up in a county where the closest stoplight was 9 miles from his front porch. His own father had been a railroad mechanic. He'd put himself through community college at night, learned clock repair from an old German watchmaker on Lexington Avenue, and built a quiet little business restoring antiques. He met my mother at a church rummage sale when she'd brought in a broken mantel clock that had been her grandfather's. He fixed it for free. He told me, years later, that he hadn't fallen in love with her at the rummage sale. He'd fallen in love with her 3 weeks later, when she came back to ask him to teach her how he'd done it. She'd wanted to know, not as small talk. She'd actually wanted to learn. That was the moment, he said. That was the door. The Whitfields did not approve. Margaret Whitfield never used my father's first name. She called him Mr. Pemberton at Christmas dinner for 22 years, and she said it the same way she'd said it the day he'd asked her permission to marry her daughter, which was the way you'd say the carpenter or the plumber. My mother married him anyway. She moved out of the Montford house and into a 1-bedroom rental above a dry cleaner on Haywood Road. They lived there for 6 years. Then my mother's aunt, a woman named Cordelia Whitfield who I never met, died and left the Montford house directly to my mother in a private trust, bypassing Margaret entirely. Cordelia had her own opinions about who deserved the house. My mother moved back in with my father on her arm, and Margaret Whitfield did not set foot in that house again for 11 years. I was 11 when my mother died. Camille was 8. The cardiac event was sudden. She'd been planting a row of hostess along the side garden one Saturday afternoon in April. My father found her between the 2nd and 3rd plant, sitting on her heels like she was just resting. The hostas were already in the ground. She'd finished what she'd started, even with her own heart giving out. The Whitfields came for the funeral. Margaret came. And 3 days after the burial, she came back with a lawyer of her own and a proposal. She wanted custody of me. Not Camille. Just me. Because I was the blood Whitfield. Camille, she said, with the precision she used for difficult sentences, was Harold's. She left the rest unsaid. My father refused. He told her, in the front hallway of the house her own daughter had inherited, that both girls were his and he didn't separate sisters. Margaret left and didn't speak to him for 9 years. She didn't speak to me either. I sent her birthday cards every year until I was 19, when I stopped, because I'd realized she was never going to write back. This is the part nobody told me until Mr. Vance opened the 2nd folder. Margaret Whitfield, my grandmother, hadn't been silent because she didn't care. She'd been silent because she'd lost the court case. She'd tried, formally, in chambers, to take custody of me. She'd argued my father was unfit. She'd lost. And the cost of her losing was a vow, made by my father in front of her lawyer, that he would never use Whitfield money to raise his daughters. The Montford house would stand, he'd live in it. But he wouldn't touch the family trust. He'd raise us on his own income, or not at all. He raised us on his own income. For 30 years. The 3 years before my father died were the loneliest of my life. I want to tell you that calmly, the way I tell clients about provenance and appraisal value, because if I tell it any other way I will cry. And I've decided I'm done crying about this part. I moved into the Cherry Street house, the rental my father had moved to after the property tax burden on the Montford house became too much, and after Camille and Mitchell convinced him to let them move into Montford to watch the place. I moved into Cherry Street in the spring of his diagnosis. Stage 3, pancreatic. The oncologist used the word aggressive 3 times in 14 minutes. My father sat in the consult chair with his hands folded, and listened the way he listened to clock mechanisms. Head slightly tilted, picking out the tick that was off. Then he asked the doctor how long. The doctor said somewhere between 18 months and 3 years with treatment. My father got 2 years and 11 months. He was generous with his odds. He always was. I called Camille from the parking garage. I asked her if she could fly out from Charlotte for the weekend so we could talk about what came next. She said she'd try. She showed up 6 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, with Mitchell in tow, and she stayed for 4 hours. She brought a casserole. She told me I was handling it so well. She offered, without specifics, to help with anything I needed. Then she got in their SUV and drove the 2.5 hours back to Charlotte, and I didn't see her again for 4 months. Across 3 years, Camille visited our father exactly 7 times. I kept count, not out of bitterness, out of habit. I'm an appraiser. I count things. I tracked her visits in the back of the same notebook, where I logged his medication times and his weight, and his blood pressure. 7 visits in 3 years. The longest was 3 days, the week of his 69th birthday. The shortest was 40 minutes, on a Tuesday in October when she'd been in town for a thing. I, on the other hand, did not leave. I gave up my apartment in Charlotte. I gave up the senior position at the regional auction house where I'd been working for 9 years, and I went freelance so I could do appraisals from his kitchen table when the home health aide was there. I cooked for him. I bathed him when he could no longer stand. I sat beside him in chemo infusion rooms in 7 different facilities across 2 states, because his oncologist sent him to specialists. I read him out loud the John le Carre novels he loved when his eyes got too tired to read them himself. The last book we got through was Smiley's People. He died 11 days before the end of A Perfect Spy, which I was reading him as a backup. I finished it anyway, alone in his room, 2 days after the funeral, because he'd wanted to know how it ended. Camille's eulogy at the funeral was 3 minutes long. She talked about how Dad had taught her to ride a bike. She talked about the trip to the Outer Banks in 1996. She did not mention his last 3 years. She did not mention me. Mitchell stood beside her with his hand on her lower back and nodded the way men nod at corporate retreats. I gave my eulogy after hers. I talked about clocks, about how my father had spent his life listening for what was off and fixing it without making the person who owned the broken thing feel ashamed. I talked about his hands. I didn't cry until the very last sentence, which was the sentence I'd written the night before, sitting on the edge of his empty hospital bed at 3 a.m. The sentence was, "If you ever wonder whether quiet love counts, my father is the answer." Then I sat down. Camille leaned over and whispered, "That was a little long, sweetie." She used the word sweetie the way our grandmother used it, which was the way you'd use it for a small child who'd colored on a wall. The night before the will reading, I couldn't sleep. I went into my father's office on Cherry Street, the one room I hadn't touched. His desk was a roll-top, oak, late 19th century, restored by his own hand. I was looking for nothing in particular. I was looking for him, the way you look for someone in the rooms they used to fill. And in the bottom right drawer, under a stack of clock repair invoices, I found a sealed cream-colored envelope addressed in his handwriting to me. Just to me. Not to Camille. Not to my daughters. To Nora. I held it for a long time. I didn't open it. Something in me, the appraiser, the part trained to wait for the right moment, said, "Not yet. Read the will first. Hear the legal version. Then read your father's version." I put the envelope in my purse. I went to bed. I lay awake. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the envelope in my purse was the second copy. My father had left the first copy with Mr. Vance, with instructions that it be read aloud at the will reading. He'd given me the second copy in case Mr. Vance, in his words written somewhere I'd find later, loses his nerve in front of Camille. My father knew his daughters better than either of us understood. He'd planned for both versions of the morning. Robert Vance's office was in a converted Victorian on Charlotte Street, 3 blocks from the courthouse. He'd been my father's lawyer since before I was born. He'd been at every Pemberton funeral since my mother's. He was 73 years old, and he still wore a 3-piece suit to work, the vest buttoned to the second to last button, a pocket watch chain crossing his waist because he was a clockman's lawyer, and you don't represent a clockman without a pocket watch. The watch was a brass-cased Elgin my father had given him on the 20th anniversary of their professional relationship. I'd been there when Dad picked it out. I'd been 26. Camille and Mitchell arrived in their black Range Rover at 9:50. I arrived at 9:55. Mr. Vance's secretary brought us coffee in white china cups and led us into the conference room. The table was mahogany. There were 4 chairs. Camille and Mitchell sat on one side. I sat on the other. Mr. Vance sat at the head. He had 2 folders in front of him. One was thick, bound in burgundy leather. The other was thin, a manila folder with my father's handwriting on the tab in pencil. Just my father's initials. HP. Before I begin, Mr. Vance said, I want to acknowledge that this is a difficult day. Your father was a friend of mine. I will read the will as he prepared it. There is no commentary. There is no improvisation. He asked me to do this exactly as he wrote it. I will honor that. If at any point either of you needs a moment, please say so. Camille nodded. Mitchell crossed his legs. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. The first folder, the burgundy one, was the main will. It took 22 minutes to read. The provisions were what I'd expected and what Camille had clearly expected. The personal effects were divided. My father's clock collection went to me. Camille shifted in her chair. The investment account, which held $73,000, was to be divided equally between us. The cars went to me, because Camille and Mitchell had 2 of their own. The Cherry Street house, which my father had rented for the last 6 years of his life, was not in his name, and was not part of the estate. The Montford house, which Camille and Mitchell had been living in for 4 years, was the only thing left unaddressed. Camille was leaning forward. I could see her right hand resting on Mitchell's left, fingertips pressed white against his knuckles. Mitchell was breathing through his nose. Mr. Vance turned a page. The residence located at 4112 Cumberland Avenue in the Montford Historic District, he read, and any and all real property associated therewith shall be conveyed. He paused, cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses. Shall be conveyed in trust to my daughter Eleanor Pemberton, known as Nora, sole beneficiary, with the provision that she may, at her sole discretion and without legal obligation, permit other family members to remain in residence for such time as she sees fit. The room held its breath. Camille's hand went still on Mitchell's. Mitchell did not move. Mr. Vance did not look up. I did not understand for a second. I was the appraiser. I read documents for a living. And my brain, trained to translate language into objects, stalled on the word soul. Sole beneficiary. Sole. Single. Only. Me. That can't be right, Camille said. Her voice was thin, controlled, almost a whisper. Mom's house was supposed to be, it was always supposed to be, Dad said. Mrs. Hayes. Mr. Vance said gently, I'm required to finish reading. He turned another page. He looked at me, briefly, with an expression I could not name. Then he opened the second folder, the manila one, the thin one. He removed a single cream-colored sheet of paper. There is one more document, he said. The held breath in the room broke. The cream-colored sheet of paper in Mr. Vance's hand was a codicil. This codicil, Mr. Vance read, was added 11 months ago, at the request of Harold Pemberton, and acknowledges the existence and disposition of assets not previously listed in the primary will. These assets are held in a separate instrument, the Whitfield Family Trust, established in 1961 by Cordelia Whitfield, and amended in 1993 by Margaret Whitfield, deceased. Camille's mouth opened. Mitchell's hand, which had been resting on her arm, moved to his own knee. The Whitfield Family Trust, Mr. Vance read, passed in its entirety to Margaret Whitfield upon the death of Cordelia Whitfield in 1988. Upon Margaret Whitfield's death in October of last year, the trust passed by named beneficiary instrument to Eleanor Pemberton, known as Nora, the only surviving direct biological descendant of Margaret Whitfield. Estimated current valuation, as of the most recent annual audit, $4,216,000. Mitchell made a small noise. Camille stared at me across the mahogany table. Her face had gone the color of unfired clay. Her mouth was slightly open. The pearl earrings, my mother's earrings, caught the morning light from the window behind her. "That's a mistake," she said. Her voice was flat. "That's a clerical mistake. Grandmother Margaret didn't speak to us. She didn't even come to Dad's funeral. Mrs. Whitfield passed 6 months before your father, Mrs. Hayes," Mr. Vance said. "She had been in private correspondence with him for the preceding 5 years." Camille's head turned slowly toward Mr. Vance. Then back to me. "You knew about this," she said. I shook my head. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. I shook my head again. "You knew about this," she repeated, louder this time. "You and Dad, you sat there, the two of you, in that house while I was running my life, raising my children, and the whole time you were Camille," Mr. Vance said. His voice cut through hers, not loud, just final. "I assure you. Your sister did not know about the trust. Your father gave me specific instructions on that point. Nora was not informed because your father did not want her decisions about his care to be influenced by knowledge of future inheritance. He wanted to know that she was choosing to be with him because she chose to, not because she was waiting for an outcome. I will tell you something true. I sat in that chair, in that office, with the smell of old wood and Mr. Vance's cologne, and the cold remainder of coffee in front of me, and the first thing I felt was not joy. It was not vindication. It was not even surprise. The first thing I felt was that my father had been protecting me from something for 30 years, and he had been protecting me without telling me, and the weight of that protection had cost him something I'd never understood until that moment. He had let me think his side of the family was where the money came from. He had let me think the Whitfields had erased me. "There is one further provision in the codicil," Mr. Vance said, "and it requires me to read a personal statement that your father attached." "To my daughters," Mr. Vance read, in my father's voice, in my father's careful words. "There is a thing I have not told you, and I have not told you because I did not know how. I will tell you now because I will not have the chance again. Camille," Mr. Vance read, "before I met your mother, before the Whitfields, before any of this, I was briefly married. I was 23 years old. Her name was Tessa Hollis. We were married for 14 months. She left because she did not want to be a wife. She wanted other things, and she pursued them, and I do not blame her. We separated peacefully. We had not had a child during our marriage. But 2 months after our divorce was finalized, she called me from a hospital in Charleston. She had given birth. She had not told me she was pregnant. She did not want the child. She asked me if I would take her. I said yes before she finished the question." Camille's hand rose slowly to her mouth. "That child was you, Camille. You are mine. You have always been mine. I held you in my arms the day after you were born, and I have held you in my heart every day since. But you are not biologically Eleanor's daughter. Eleanor met you when you were 9 weeks old, and she made you hers in every way that mattered. She adopted you legally in 1988. She loved you no less than she loved your sister. There was no part of her love that was reserved by blood. She made me promise that we would never tell either of you. She wanted you to be sisters without complication. She did not want her family's small thinking to ever land on you. I kept that promise for 38 years. I am breaking it now, because I am dying, and because there is information you will need. Camille was crying. Not loudly, just tears moving silently down her face and onto the collar of her navy sheath dress. Mitchell stared at her. He didn't reach for her hand. I noticed that. Tessa Hollis, Mr. Vance read, is alive. She lives in Savannah, Georgia. She has been in contact with me, by letter, for the last 4 years. She would like, if you ever wish it, to meet you. She has not asked to. She has not pushed. She simply wanted me to know that the door is open, on her side, whenever you might choose to walk through it. I leave you her address and her phone number, attached to this document. You owe her nothing. You owe me nothing on this point either. But I could not die with this sealed in my chest, knowing that one day, perhaps after I was gone, you might find out from someone less careful than me. You are my daughter. You will always be my daughter. Nothing here changes that. But you have a story that started before me, and you deserve to know it. Camille made a sound. It was not a word. It was a small, wounded thing. Nora, Mr. Vance read. Nora, you are the biological daughter of your mother and me. You are, by blood, the last Whitfield. Margaret tried to take you from me when you were 11. She failed in court. I made her a promise, in chambers, that I would never use Whitfield money to raise you, and I kept that promise. We lived on what I made. You grew up the way you grew up, because I refused to let her buy her way into your life when she could not earn her way into it. I do not regret that decision. But Margaret, in her last years, finally understood what she had done. She wrote to me 5 years ago, and asked if she could try, even at the end, to be the grandmother she had not been. I let her. I did not tell you because she was afraid you would refuse her, and I was afraid she was right. She visited me at the hospital twice. She did not ask to see you. She said she did not deserve to ask. She left the trust to you. She left a letter for you, separate from this one, which I have given to Mr. Vance to provide. I am sorry I did not give you the chance to know her. I thought I was protecting you. I may have been wrong. You decide what to do with what she left, including whether to read her letter at all. Mr. Vance closed the second folder. I have a third document, he said quietly. From Margaret Whitfield. It is addressed to Nora. I am required, by the terms of her own will, to offer it to you. You may accept it or decline it. I held out my hand. The envelope was thinner than my father's. The handwriting on the outside was unfamiliar to me. It was looped, formal. I looked at the letter for a long time. I'll read it at home, I said. Mr. Vance nodded. Camille was wiping her face with the back of her hand. Mitchell handed her a tissue. She took it without looking at him. Did you know? She asked me. I did not know, I said. I didn't know any of it. Not the trust. Not Margaret. Not you. I didn't know about Tessa. I had no idea. She nodded slowly. She looked down at the table. I always wondered, she said. I never told anybody, but I always wondered. I don't look like Mom. I look like Dad, sort of, but not, I always wondered. You're his daughter, I said. Just like I am. You always were. She made the sound again. The small one. Then she put her face in her hands and the rest of it came out. 20 minutes of grief held inside a navy sheath dress for an hour. And Mitchell, finally, put his hand on her shoulder, though it was the wrong kind of hand. It was the hand of a man who was calculating, not comforting. I saw it. She did not see it. She was facing down. Mr. Vance excused himself. He left us alone. Camille cried for a long time. I did not move. I let her cry. I had loved my sister for 41 years through a layer of resentment so thin and so habitual that I had forgotten it was there, and now the layer was gone and what was underneath was just love, and I let her have it. When she could speak again, she said, "I was so cruel to you. I was so, Mitchell and I, we had already started the paperwork. We were going to ask you to sign off on the Montfort house. We had an attorney. He'd drafted." "I know," I said. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry, Nora. I don't even know what to do with, I don't know who I am right now." "You're my sister," I said. "That part hasn't changed. That part doesn't change." She looked up at me. The pearl earrings caught the light. She reached up, with both hands, and unscrewed them, slowly. She set them down on the mahogany table between us. "These are yours," she said. "These were Mom's. They were yours. I took them. I shouldn't have. Keep them," I said. "She would have wanted you to have them. Both of us. But you too. You were her daughter. She chose you. That matters more than the earrings did." Mitchell, sitting beside her, finally spoke. "Camille, honey, we should talk about what this means for—" "Not now, Mitchell," she said, without opening her eyes. "Not now." I drove back to Cherry Street alone. Camille and Mitchell drove back to the Montfort house. We had not yet talked about what came next. There would be conversations. There would be lawyers. There would be a future Camille and Mitchell would have to negotiate, in which the Montfort house was not theirs, in which the financial certainty they had constructed their lives around had quietly evaporated, and in which Camille was now also going to have to decide whether to call a woman named Tessa Hollis in Savannah. I sat at the kitchen table in my father's rental. I opened the cream-colored envelope my father had hidden in his roll-top desk. "My Nora," he wrote. "If you are reading this, it means—" Mr. Vance read the codicil and the letter aloud. "You always did find things. That is why I knew you would be all right. I want to tell you what I learned by being your father, and what I learned by watching you take care of me for 3 years. I learned that the people who do the work do not always announce that they are doing it. I learned that quiet love is the strongest kind, because it does not require an audience. I learned that I had failed you, in many small ways, by letting the world tell you you were the lesser daughter, when I had known since you were 5 years old that you were not lesser. You were simply quieter. Quiet is not a deficit. Quiet is a discipline. You were always disciplined. I want to ask you for one thing. Not a demand. A request. The Whitfield money is yours. The house is yours. You earned them. Not by being there at the end, but by being who you are. But I would ask, if you can, to be gentle with Camille. She has been carrying a confusion about herself for 38 years, and she has been pretending it was nothing, and the pretending has made her hard in places where she was once soft. I do not ask you to forgive her on my behalf. I ask you, only, to give her the same patience you gave me. She will need it more than I did. She just doesn't know it yet." Lastly, read Margaret's letter, whatever it says. Read it. She tried. At the end. Trying matters. I love you. I always did, even when I didn't say it the way I should have. I love you. Now go live the rest of your life. It is large. You are large. The world has been small around you, and that was not your fault, and it is over now. Dad. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I called Camille. She came over that night. She brought a duffel bag. She slept on the pull-out couch in my father's office. 6 months later, she filed for divorce from Mitchell. She kept the kids. She kept herself. She also, 2 months after that, drove to Savannah by herself and met Tessa Hollis for the first time. She came back like a woman who had been given the chapter of her own story she had not known was missing. The Montfort house, by my father's design, became mine. I did not sell it. I did not move into it. I gave Camille and her children life tenancy rights to live in it, with the deed in my name and the property in trust, so that no future Mitchell, no future calculation, could ever take that house from my sister or her children. She accepted, after 3 days of argument. The Whitfield Trust I have not touched yet, except to set up a scholarship in my mother's name at the music school where she had once wanted to study cello. That is what the money is for now. That is what it was always for. I read Margaret Whitfield's letter the night Camille moved into the spare bedroom on Cherry Street. I will tell you only this. She apologized. She apologized for the custody case. She apologized for the silence. She apologized for the funeral she had not come to, and the birthday cards she had not answered. She told me she had watched me from far away for 30 years. She told me she had read every article ever written about the auction house I worked at. She told me she had once bought a small clock at an estate sale, just because my father's name was on the appraisal certificate inside the case. She told me she had been afraid to write to me directly. She told me she had been a small woman in a large body and that smallness had cost her her granddaughter, and she had only understood that in the last 5 years, and she was sorry. She was so sorry. I did not visit her grave for a long time. I waited. I waited because I wanted to be sure of what I was going to say. 8 months after the will reading, I drove to Riverside Cemetery on a Tuesday in October. I brought one of the hostas from my mother's garden, the same row she had been planting when she died. Still alive 30 years later, because I had divided and replanted them every spring of my adult life. I set the hosta on Margaret Whitfield's grave. I told her I had read her letter. I told her I forgave her. I told her I would have liked to know her. I told her that I understood, now, that her silence had not been about not loving me. It had been about not knowing how. I sat on the grass beside her stone for a long time. A family is not a measurement. A family is not arithmetic. A family is not who has the right last name, or the right blood, or the right address. A family is who shows up. A family is who keeps showing up. A family is who learns, eventually, what they got wrong, and tries to make it right, even if they only get the last 5 years to try. My grandmother got 5 years. My sister got the rest of her life. My father, who held all of it, got the gift of dying in a house that smelled like his daughter's tea and his daughter's voice reading him spy novels by lamplight. He got the gift of knowing that the daughter the world had called lesser was the one who would carry his name forward, without ever needing it to be louder than it was. If you have been the daughter who showed up, the one whose work was not seen because it did not come with a paycheck, the one whose love was filed under natural instead of earned, I want you to know that the universe has its own ledger. It is slow. It is patient. It is sometimes very late. But it keeps the books. And one day, in a room you did not see coming, somebody will read a page out loud, and the people who measured you wrong will hear the real number for the first time. I am not the lesser daughter. I never was. I am the one who stayed. And the wisteria, by the way, is still blooming. Every May. My mother trained it for 30 years and it has not stopped yet. Some things you plant outlast the rooms they grew up in. That is what I want for you too.